Hello, boys and girls, cats and dogs. This is an inclusive channel. And I have with me today Gary, whom I found on Instagram. He has a fascinating Instagram page. And his Instagram page is Gary Knits, Gary Rides, with underscores between all the full words. So tell us all about yourself.
My name's Gary Boston. I'm living right now in sunny Southern California, but I grew up in Texas and spent most of my adult life in New York City, where I had my whole career was based in New York City, and then we moved out here. My husband and I moved out here a few years ago to be closer to aging parents, as you know, it happens. And so we've been out here for a few years, and yeah, I keep busy. Well, sure, we'll get into it, but I keep busy doing a lot of knitting and writing, as my Instagram handle suggests. So
That's cool.
That's kind of the story, yeah.
So how long have you been knitting?
So knitting, I've been knitting probably since about 2003, 2004. I actually, well, if we want to Sound of Music this and start at the very beginning, a
very good place to start.
Yes. I had a pretty crafty childhood. So both my mom and her mom were crafters. So my grandmother knit, they both quilt. So we were kids, we did a lot of I don't know, I assume it still exists, but needlepoint on plastic canvas. And you made these sort of, tissue box covers and, all the placemats and things like that. So it was, big thread, or yarn, basically, a needle. So it was easy for kids to do. So we did a lot of that. And then I kind of graduated up to counted cross stitch when I was sort of preteen and teenager. And then went away to college, and all that sort of dropped off the map. So, we fast forward to about 2003, and I actually started with crochet. The first thing my partner at the time was a big TV watcher, and I wasn't, but I wanted something to be able to, and I'm, notorious, you can talk to my husband about it, but needing to multitask. So just sitting and watching TV is not a thing that I'm prone to do. So I wanted to be able to do something with him, but wanted to actually be doing something that I found, useful or rewarding. And so a friend of ours had started crocheting and suggested that. I was like, oh, my grandmother crocheted, and maybe I'll, give that a shot. So the first thing I did was just a single crochet, sort of square pot holder thing. And, at that point in time, there was pre-Ravelry and, pre the sort of explosion in fiber arts. And the things that I was finding, I wasn't really interested in trying to do a big Afghan. And most of the crochet patterns I was finding, where it was a lot of granny square stuff and things that just I wasn't going to ever wear myself. And so I kind of shifted gears and picked up the Stitch and Bitch book. Debbie Stoller, I think was her name. But it was just a basic intro to knitting book, and sort of picked that up. And then that kind of launched me be knitting. And, so I kind of went through the normal, did a hat, did a scarf, did some more things. I was living in New York at the time, and a friend and I discovered that we were both knitters, and he approached, so this is probably 2004, he approached a woman who owned a knit shop, a yarn store in the East Village. It doesn't exist anymore, called Knit New York, and pitched the idea of doing a men's knitting night. And she was like, sure, why not? And so for about a year, we co-hosted a men's knitting night in this little yarn shop in the East Village. And, we'd all bring beer and wine and whatever, and we'd sit around, and, and it grew, we got to a point where there were on a good night, 10 or 12 of us. And so that was a lot of fun. And I was at a point in my career at that point where I'd kind of taken a hiatus for a year and was doing some pro bono work. And so I had a lot more free time. And so I knit a lot then. And then things changed. I sort of got back on the career path, and my free time dwindled, and the kind of knitting, I I would always have, usually, you know, someone had a baby and I would make them booties and a hat or a little, you know, kimono sweater or something like that. But it was really never something that I did sort of continuously through that period of time until we moved out here. So I would and mostly what I worked on was hats because I love knitting hats and I love wearing hats. So I did a lot of hat knitting in the meantime. But it wasn't really until we moved out here that I picked it back up and sort of started pursuing it a little more aggressively. You know, it was really, it was really I'm sure you remember, but post the 2016 election, the sort of pussy hat explosion that sort of took over everything. And as soon as people found out I was a knitter, sort of just kept requesting to do it. So I probably that year just made and gave away about 60 of those. So I was like a little factory on the pink hats. And that, you know, that kind of got me back into it, really. I mean, I said, well, you know, I'm really enjoying this. I have a lot more free time now that we moved out here. And then just started kind of discovered Ravelry and all the things that had available to me. And that's when I really started picking up the knitting again. So
that's cool.
Yeah.
Actually, I think a lot of us, men especially, they did some of it as a kid and enjoyed it, but then put it down and then picked it up again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's, you know, I mean, it's, I think about like when I was, you know, in the peak of my work life, you know, just not having, you know, any free time to like, you know, really devote to it. You know, I kind of wish now that I've really gotten back into it and started exploring different types of knitting and being a little more adventurous in terms of what I'm, you know, willing to try. I kind of wish I had pursued it along the way and sort of kept it up because I think I would be, you know, much more advanced than I currently am. So, but I'm glad I'm able to do a lot of it now. So,
do you design as well?
I don't. You know, and we can talk about sort of one of the things that I'm working on. I have never even considered it. There's so many great designers out there, but I did just see because I've started getting into shawls now, this shawl knitting, and Stephen West was just has posted a new sort of tutorial thing and was asking folks about what they might like to see in the next tutorial. And one of the things he suggested or threw out there was, you know, starting to design your own shawls, and that sort of like made me go, maybe somewhere down the road. But for now, there's just so many great designs out there that I feel like just sort of learning the different techniques and playing with all of this amazing yarn, which also did not exist when I first started knitting. You know, there's just so much to pursue on those fronts. So
yeah, a big explosion in hand dyers.
Amazing. You know, I guess it was before technically the pandemic started, and I don't even know what motivated me to do it, but I signed up probably early in 2020 for one of these Vogue knitting live online things where you can take classes, and then they have this marketplace where different vendors sort of pitch their products, and they offer you a discount and whatever. And I think was trying to learn some new techniques, and so I said, I'll take some classes, and then I had access to all of these vendors, and just these indie dyers just blew my mind, just how many of them were out there, and you know, all of these people that were kind of in their kitchens and making this gorgeous yarn. I will say that it did lead to a bit of an explosion on the purchasing side on my end, where my yarn stash, you know, grew from one little plastic tub to several plastic tubs and now taken over a closet. But I still, after watching.
You sure it's a closet and not a whole room?
Not yet. But I do, you know, look at, watch, you know, some of the podcasters, you know, that have the walls of yarn behind them. And I would say, well, I'm not there yet, not quite yet. So, but yeah, it's been fantastic to sort of discover all of these, you know, yarns and, you know, like I said, when I first started, I was mainly doing hats, mainly working in worsted weight yarn. So fingering and all these, the self-striping sock yarns and things like that just didn't exist back then. And it's just been a lot of fun to play around with that stuff. So
Yeah, when I got back into it, I was mainly worsted, almost all budget yarn. If I bought something that was posh yarn, because usually it's because I like the color, then I was either afraid to use it,
right.
or didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
And I still, well, not from those days, but I have posh yarn now that I'm afraid to use. And I just have to, what I need to do is listen to the yarn.
Yeah. I always get a little scared when and this is probably, again, why I sort of gravitated towards hats, is whenever I'd find an expensive yarn that I loved, I was scared to buy too little of it, because I was like, what if I start making that scarf and I run out, and then, what I'm going to do? So I'm like, I always sort of said, well, at least I can make a cashmere hat out of this, this beautiful, this big cashmere yarn, which is what I ended up doing, because, at that time I didn't have the budget to buy a sweater's quantity of, super fancy yarn. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Now, well, as time goes by, there are more and more of those budget yarns that I just don't want to use again.
Yeah.
Because, and more of the nice ones that I do.
Yeah. I found that there's that sort of in between, I know you have talked before with folks about, like knit picks. Like, I think some of their, like, the sort of the acrylics that they do are much, much better than at least the acrylics that I inherited from my grandmother from the 70s, which, were
the kind of yarn that gives acrylic a bad name.
Yeah. But I think that is improved. Yeah. And the way that they're, able to sort of blend some wool in with an acrylic to sort of make a little nicer touch to the yarn. So
yeah, actually, I like a nice soft touch acrylic, and some of those really can be budget yarns.
Yeah.
I just don't like a harsh touch.
Yeah.
And for some purposes, especially for babies, you want something that's synthetic so that it's washable.
Well, and one of the things that really got me ramping up my production is I decided a couple years ago that for all of the young people in our lives, so friends and nieces and nephews, as they graduated from high school, what I was going to do is for graduation was make them a dorm blanket for their dorm room. And for that, you want something that a college kid can throw in the wash and not have to try to worry about hand washing and all that stuff. And so there's some great products out there for easy care and stuff like that.
I still have one of those dorm blankets that my grandmother made for me when she crocheted it, and it was when I started college in 1980. So
yeah, and that was really the motivation, because I have one of my most treasured possessions is my grandmother knit us all stuff when we were kids, and I have a great sort of scrappy granny square Afghan that she made me when I was a kid. But one of the things that I treasure is a blanket that's knit in horrible acrylic yarn from Kmart, because we still had the skeins. And she started it in the 70s, and then for whatever reason put it down. And as she aged, she couldn't figure out the pattern any longer. And so when I started knitting, and I had gone to her house, and she was giving me all her old knitting needles and stuff like that. And we found in a drawer, like in a plastic bag, this, sort of half finished Afghan, but all of the yarn still there. And she said, well, if you can fit it, if you can figure it out, the pattern, see if you can finish it. And so I was able to finish it. And, it was just sort of having something like that, that I thought, I don't know how many moms are out there, crocheting and knitting things for their kids anymore. So if I can be the guy who can send them off to college with something handmade, then hopefully, they'll be able to have for the rest of your life. So that's been a fun, and I try to either work with the mom, or if the kid is interested, kind of work with them on kind of what they would like to see in it. So, some of them want it in the school colors of where they're going to college. other ones have, their favorite colors, or they're sort of, they don't want a traditional design. They want something more abstract. And so it's been a fun kind of a project to work on.
That sounds like fun.
Yeah.
I would love that.
And as a result of sort of launching into that, I went back to crochet. So I had picked up over the years, picked up a crochet hook and tried to sort of get back into it, and could never make heads or tails of how the structure of it. The counting used to just drive me crazy. I would end up with, always adding or subtracting, and end up with a zigzag, square that it was supposed to be a square, but it was wider and narrower in places. And so finally, I said, I know it works up faster. I know there are a lot of designs, especially for blankets, that are great in crochet, and I want to get this done. So I found a local yarn store here, and went down there and took lessons. And so I finally have gotten. I'm still not nearly as strong a crocheter as I am a knitter, but it is at least in the wheelhouse now. So
if you'd like, I will email you a transcription of a blanket tutorial that I wrote up. That's a really, really, well, actually I have one right here. It's really, really easy to do.
Oh, wow.
And it looks harder than it is. It looks impressive, and you can do it in any yarn, any colors. It works with solids. It works especially well with self-striping. You can make it as big as you want.
Oh, wow.
I'll email you that transcription.
Yeah,
I was going to the guy who did the tutorial wouldn't let me do anything with the transcription, because he said the design was not his, and there had already been enough confusion because people thought the design was his because he did the tutorial, but he just did his based on having seen a picture of something that was done probably in the 50s or 60s.
Right.
So he didn't want any more drama.
Yeah.
But
that would be great.
Between you and me, we can do this.
I especially like blankets and crochet, because it just moves so much faster. I mean, you just get so much more fabric for an hour spent. And I love all of the different motifs, the sort of granny square type motifs. It's just a lot of fun. So I always try to, not always successfully, but I'm really trying to keep at least one of my projects as a crochet project, just so I don't lose that sort of muscle memory of remembering how to do it also. Yeah. Because I tend to have, sweet spot is like 4 or 5 projects going at any moment in time. So.
And I have a box of UFOs too.
I used to be a serial like starter. So I would like start something, and then I sort of like, okay, I get how this works, and then I'm just kind of like move on to the next one and try to figure, okay, a new technique, and play with a new yarn. But I've really tried to be a little more disciplined and have only 4 or 5 going at any point in time. But you want to have, or at least I want to have, something that requires a little more concentration, something that I can sit and watch TV and sort of mindlessly work on. And so.
Yeah, there are some things that I can work on. This blanket I could be doing while we were sitting here and talking. I have another one that I'm working on that I couldn't do while I'm sitting here talking, because it does take more focus.
Right.
I was going back through your Instagram just before, and I saw a post that you did recently proposing a knit along / crochet along for Shawls for fundraising.
Yep.
For the AIDS fundraising work that you do.
Yeah.
So tell us about that.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess so. The AIDS life cycle is the fundraiser that I was talking about, which is a 545-mile bike ride from San Francisco to Los Angeles every year. Mm-hmm. About 3,000 people do it, and it raises money for the Los Angeles LGBT Center and the San Francisco AIDS Foundation. And I got started. We can talk about my past history with charity bike rides, but A friend of mine had joined the board of San Francisco AIDS Foundation. She's not a cyclist, but she'd known I had done a bunch of these rides back when I was younger, and said, well, as a board member, I feel like I should do it. Would you, be willing to dust off your bike and try it again? And so I did. I had a fantastic time. And so kind of committed then that I would do it 10 more times with the goal of, over those 11 years, trying to raise $200,000 for AIDS Life Cycle. So I've continued it the last couple of years. They haven't had the actual ride, but they've had events. So I've been able to ride the 545 miles the week of the ride and continue to raise money. And, as I was doing it, I kind of set up this Instagram account to sort of, originally it was sort of just about my training for the AIDS Life Cycle. And then as I started knitting more, I started putting more knitting pictures in there. And just after I finished the ride this year, I was like, it'd be really fun to try to come up with a way to combine these two things that I love and passionate about into, to one thing. And I have had a couple of ideas. I think I'm going to do some sort of like knitting sort of tokens of appreciation for people who are donors, have been donors to the ride. But I thought, why not try to do a knit along, crochet along? Because I always have fun doing those. I've done several through different podcasts, and try to figure out a way to make it a fundraiser. And so I'd kind of sat with the idea for a while, and then just finally put out that post, just sort of like, someone's going to be able to figure out how we can make this happen. I'm just going to throw it out there and see what happens. Well, I posted it on Instagram, and then I'm part of a knitting group in Facebook called Knitters Gotta Knit, which is co-run by Arena Shar. I don't know if you know her, but she has a Fiber Chats is her. She has a podcast, which is really great. But anyway, it kind of blew up overnight, and Adela at Lola Bean Yarn Company and the Knit More Girls podcast shared it. And so all of a sudden, where I was hoping to maybe find one designer who would say like, oh yeah, I'll help with the design and we can do this, had dozens of people come back to me, and then started talking to a bunch of different people who said, well, why, if you're getting this great response, why just do this one mao, whatever you want to call it. Why not try to do a series of them over the course of the year and sort of have a continuous, fundraiser happening? So that is, and this I sort of briefly posted about it, so this will be the first time that it's really, getting out there. But that's what we're going to plan to do. So the original plan was to do a knit along and crochet along in sort of the April-May time period, and we're still going to do that. Just to be fair to the folks that responded to me, kind of the first couple of people that responded to me, I'm working with them, and we're going to have that happening. But I'm going to try to expand it now, and maybe starting as soon as sometime in September. May not all be shawls, but we're going to try to every couple months do one of these, and try to. A lot of the designers were kind of new designers, and so I thought it'd be fun to sort of like help some new designers get some stuff out there, and raise a little money for the AIDS ride.
Yeah, I commented just as soon as I saw the post, but I felt like I was late to the party because I would love to volunteer.
I saw your response this morning, and I am absolutely going to hit you up because there's been a lot of interest on the knitting side, but I'd love to be always, maybe not every single time, maybe we'll alternate, but a couple times to do a joint thing. So I will definitely follow up with you, and I'd love to do that.
But also I saw at least one person volunteering to coordinate the sort of pattern and yarn kits, putting those together. And if you could do that and sell those at a premium, that would be an amazing fundraising device.
Yeah, it's interesting because,
especially if you could get like a yarn vendor to give you a substantial discount or even a donation.
Right.
How cool would that be?
That would be amazing. We've a couple of the yarn dyers have reached out and said they would be willing to or would like to try to help out however they can. And this is kind of, it's a little different than how a normal make along would work, because there's this money aspect of the fundraising aspect to it that we're trying to kind of negotiate. And I said from the beginning, my only two real goals were, to make a little money, but for the charities, but to have fun. And I wanted to make sure that any of the vendors, whether it was a designer or a yarn dyer, were getting fully compensated, because I don't want, I know people are very generous, but at the same time, it's labor, and I want to make sure that the designers are able to make, are not giving away their stuff for free. And so we're each I think each designer is going to work a little differently. Whether it's I did a little poll, and it seems like the sweet spot for people who want to participate is kind of in the $5 to $7 range, what they're kind of willing to pay above and beyond the cost of a pattern as a sort of a charitable donation. So we're kind of figuring out as we go how the best and sort of most seamless way to sort of make it happen. But I'm really excited. I was blown away by the response. And, like I said, my plan is to have 8 more of these rides to do. And so if it's something that we can kind of test the waters this year and see how it works and kind of iron out the kinks, and we can continue to do it for, the next few years, I think it'll be great. I mean, I think it'll be, and it doesn't, it's, I said shawls just because that was what I was interested in. And those seem to be really popular right now in terms of knit-alongs. There's a lot of, I know the Fiber Hustle guys have been doing the Vertices Unite, Stephen Westshall, Max from Les Garçons is doing his new design. And so it seems like
I love them.
Aren't they great?
Yes.
Have you seen that new shawl of his, the Opus shawl? It is stunning.
I don't know whether I have.
He's just kicking off a make along. It almost looks woven. It's sort of a grid pattern, but it's just absolutely beautiful.
Oh yes, that might be a picture that I've seen floating around. That's just beautiful. Yeah, I love watching their YouTube channel. They haven't posted much lately, have they?
They just did one just last week, I think. They'd had.
I'll have to look. Yeah.
They had a fire. They had a fire in their building.
Oh no!
That had caused them to have to wash all their yarn and do all this stuff, and so it's kind of delayed stuff. But everything seems. So stay tuned. I think the first big. We're working on some last things, but my plan is to be able to announce the first make along here in a bit, and then, assuming that goes well, my plan would be to maybe kick one off right after New Year's. So kind of let everyone have the November, December, because there's all sorts of holiday, make-alongs and the indie thing that happens on Ravelry and stuff going on. I didn't want to crowd into that space, but maybe start one off at the beginning of the year, then do one in the spring. And then the ride every year runs early June. And so I thought maybe then to kind of finish it off with, which also coincides with Pride Month, to do sort of a post-ride Pride one in the sort of early summer. So,
how cool would it be to be able to sell kits for people to give as Christmas gifts?
Yeah,
I mean, we could talk for days about this just by itself, and I would actually like to talk at length with you offline.
Yeah, I'd love that. I mean, like I said, this is it's all new, and it's all the brainstorming has been real. I mean, if I hadn't had a conversation with one of the designers about doing this as a sort of multiple series, it would have never crossed my mind, just because I had a very sort of small idea about just like doing one and done, but it's kind of blown up since then. So I'd love to have an offline conversation about how maybe to put together kits, which would be great. And work with. I mean, there's so, like we said, there's so many great indie dyers out there that it could be a lot of fun to.
And you could make the kits in different price ranges too, using, say, some less expensive yarns that are still nice to the touch, and some really nice yarns. have either choice for a particular pattern.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of have
Um,
different
and
options for, yeah.
yeah, that's great. Oh, this could be fun.
Yeah.
This could,
Yeah.
I would, yeah, we must talk about this because I would
Okay.
love to be involved and help you in any way that I can.
That'll be great. Yeah. It's sort of adding another dimension to, to two things that I already really enjoyed. And interestingly, from that original post, I also met another guy who is an AIDS life cycle participant and also a knitter. So that was kind of cool as well.
Really?
Oh, yeah,
Oh yeah.
I don't think he's ridden the ride. He was signed up in training to do the 2020 ride, and then the official ride got canceled, and so it became an at home ride. But so the ride for next year is on, and signups begin on the 18th. So just 5 days.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, so
Now, when you were in New York, did you do the New York Boston ride?
So that's how I got started in these AIDS life cycle, or the AIDS rides. Back then they called them the AIDS rides. So a woman that I used to work with, I think she was a cyclist, and when they first did the first Boston New York ride, and it was a big deal, the riding down the streets in New York, and she had seen that and said, oh, would you be interested in doing this? I hadn't ridden a bike since I was a kid. But she, for whatever, she convinced me, and so the next year we trained and we did the Boston New York ride, and from then it just sort of took off. So I did that ride. I think I rode it 3 times, and then I was on the crew 1 year, and I met a ton of people that are still dear friends of mine doing those rides. And so we ended up doing, as they expanded those kind of across the country. So there was Chicago Twin Cities, there was a DC one, and then they expanded it, and so they had these AIDS vaccine rides where they were funding research for an AIDS vaccine. So I rode across Texas twice, and then
Wow.
I did the first.
That is a bit of a schlep.
Well, I grew up in Texas. I grew up on a farm in a farming community in North Texas, and so it was kind of, at that point it was just like I kind of felt like, oh, that'll be great. I'll go home, and it was a really, the first year it went from Austin to Houston and then up to Dallas, and then the second year it just went from Austin to Dallas maybe. But I did that twice, and it was really great because it was one of the last expansion rides they did before that whole operation kind of shut down. And so, but the rides were very, very small relative to how big the Boston New York ride was.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a really intimate little, there were probably 700 people, but it was a small group, and we just had a great time doing those two. And then in '99, I did the first Alaska AIDS vaccine ride, which was
wow, Alaska.
7 days. It was about the same as the California ride. It was like 7 days, I think, just over 600 miles, and it was brutal. It was they tried to time it so it was supposed to be the warmest part of the year, but we got hit with snow and rain and sleet. They had to call like the state National Guard in to like rescue a bunch of people who had gotten sort of like stranded at a pit stop and couldn't ride anymore. And it was just a really grueling ride. And the weather was miserable until the very last day, and then it was beautiful. But that basically ended my age ride career, because I got home from that ride, put the bike in the storage bin in my apartment building, and never took it out again until 2019, when my friend asked me about doing the ride out here in California. So it was I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed it, and the California ride it's a really great experience. The 3,000 people. They call it the love bubble, because it's just this week of like everybody taking care of each other, and just a lot of great vibes, and they just make it a lot of really fun, and you kind of almost forget that you're on this sort of grueling 545-mile bike ride, because it's so well put together, and and raises a ton of money for these two charities, which it's been tough these last 2 years, because as the ride has gone from a big produced event to doing it at home, the fundraising has dropped off dramatically. So they don't have the cost to produce it, but still, these are frontline, frontline healthcare services for a lot of people in the community.
Mm-hmm.
It's just been a real tough couple of years. So I'm really glad that, not just personally, that it's going to be fun for me to get out and do the ride again next year, but they're going to be able to ramp up their fundraising and start to, hopefully, restart some of the programs that they may have had to.
And a lot of people don't realize that HIV is not gone.
No, unfortunately, it's not, and it's still new cases are. I think one of the San Francisco AIDS Foundation's sort of big picture goals is to get to 0 new cases in the city of San Francisco, and they made a lot of headway in that effort, but they're it's not there yet. So there's still a lot of work to be done, both on the prevention side and on the treatment side, in terms of the work they're doing. So
yeah. And I've always thought that the social services side is so important because there is of course the providing the medical care, but also the everything that goes into the social services side, even if it's just meals, if it's a social outlet. I used to live within walking distance of what they now call the Gethin Center in Chelsea, because I was in the New York City area for like 27 years. Okay. Oh yeah, I wish we had known each other then.
We were there the exact same time, so.
Yeah, I was there until 2018.
Oh, okay.
But I spent an awful lot of time at the center on 13th Street, and I have a very strong memory of just hanging out there, just hanging out before a meeting, and they were doing, I think it was a recruiting night for that year's New York to Boston ride, and they showed a video.
Yeah, and then like not a dry eye. That they do a great. Yeah. No, it's.
I mean, I knew it was meant to be manipulative, but I willingly was manipulated, and at that time I did not cry nearly as easily as I do now. Now I cry at the drop of a hat, but
it's a very powerful experience, and even now, having done it, I don't know how many this is going to be, but 10 11 times, that opening ceremony, and they do this sort of like at the opening ceremonies they have these sort of riderless bikes that they bring down the like middle of the aisle where everyone, and and it is just, every single time you see it, it is as powerful as the first time. And then just, I don't know, it's like, you're out there with 3,000 people that, you don't know most of them, but you really have this amazing sense of family. And I think that, especially with everything that's going on and how sort of divisive everything seems, to have the week of your life where it is just this feeling of everybody taking care of each other, and you're all sort of working together for a goal, and it's a big challenge, and not everyone's going to make it every day to on their own, but there's going to be someone there to kind of help them. It's just a really amazing event to be a part of. So you don't have to ride. That's the thing. At some point, I'm not going to be able to ride. At some point, I'm not going to be able to ride anymore, but I can still crew. You can be roadies, and
Yeah. Back then, at that time I was like very, very heavy, so I would not have been able to do it, and didn't have a bike or any money. And nowadays, I'm not. I probably couldn't. I don't really have the strength to do it.
Yeah.
I don't even know what they do in the Southeast, whether there is an equivalent. I remember a number.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think a number of, in the collapse of the old Tanqueray age rights, because Tanqueray Gin, ironically enough, was a sponsor of the thing. And a lot of little regional rides kind of cropped up, and people tried to kind of reproduce it. I think California. There's now another one that they do in New York. I don't think it goes to Boston anymore, but there is like a 3-day ride that does happen in New York. But the California one has continued to be, as big of a deal as it was back in the day. So
I do recall there was reading a number of years ago something about accusations of like financial mismanagement and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that the issue that always sort of followed those initial rides was it was produced by a for-profit company, and so they managed the whole affair, and then they took a profit, and then whatever was left went to the recipients. And so there was always this concern that, for the dollars that got raised, the fraction of it that ended up going back into the recipients, coffers, was low relative to other fundraising models. I think at some point it became a question of, volume versus percentage. So you raise a lot more money because you had a professional group sort of running these things and were able to, put on these things at big scale. But then the percentage got cut because there was a cut being taken out of it. So it was a different model. Ultimately, it collapsed and didn't work because I think that sort of followed it around. And now, that's what's cropped up in this place of the beneficiaries kind of running at them on themselves. And the ones in California sort of have the scale to kind of make it work.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, that's there are always going to be naysayers.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there were some fair criticisms. I think it was an untested way of raising money, and I don't think it's any. In some ways, it's no different than the American Heart Association paying a fundraiser to go out and fundraise for them. They're gonna they're basically paying someone to do it, and they're only going to get a fraction of what gets raised. But
and I compare it to like when I was I studied music in school, and I used to hear people who came from like small town country churches saying that a church musician should never ever be paid, should just be working, volunteering. And they would even say that a pastor, an ordained minister, should not be paid, should be. And I'm going, nobody works for free. Right. I certainly don't sing for free. Well, I don't sing anymore, but I didn't sing for free. But
yeah, no, and it gets back to the whole, kind of why one of my sort of the things that I really wanted to make sure happened if these make-alongs happen was that we made sure the designers got paid, because I get that's that's how people, make a living or make part of the living and continue to be able to do their design work is by getting paid. So I just wanted to
Well, let's work together to sell hundreds of my patterns then.
Yes, everybody wins. Everybody wins. I'm really excited. I'm really looking forward to seeing. It's just from having the people reach out to me for no other more selfish reasons, just discovering a bunch of new designers that I had not yet seen their work, and as they approached me, sort of digging into the thing, and I'm like, oh, I add that to my Ravelry queue. And
do you know, there's another thing we could talk about, because I'm compiling a pattern ebook to benefit the Hunger Project that I want to sell on Amazon, just to raise money for the Hunger Project. And I've got some pretty notable crochet designers already, but if
it's funny you should mention it, because one of the designers that reached out to me mentioned, if I started doing this as a series and could get the designers, on board, and that's the thing where we'd just have to figure out how it worked, was to compile as the thing goes on, sort of like a book of the designs that were done, and then you could continue to sell that, down the road or whatever.
So, I think that's a great idea. I think that would be a great idea to benefit the California ride, and I would love to meet a lot of the designers that that I don't. And talk to them about my project as well.
Sure. That'd be great.
because the yarn community is full of really, really big-hearted and generous people.
That's what I quickly learned, just how people were jumping in to sort of help with designs, help with ideas, just sort of brainstorming how we could make it work. So it's been really amazing to see, and it's I knew it was a great community because I've sort of been a part of it through different podcasts and things like that. Kind of have seen, especially since when I first started, and when versus walking into a yarn store. And I remember one of the first times I walked into a yarn store in New York, and I can't remember what I was trying to make, but I was asking a question about, like, well, I'm looking for this or that, and the clerk was like, well, why don't you tell your wife or girlfriend to come in, and we can discuss with her, like, what exactly it is that she needs or whatever. And I was just like, are you serious? Like,
one time my ex and I were here in Wilmington visiting, and we stopped at a local yarn shop here, and there were some very nice old ladies coming out of the shop, and they were just amazed to see men going into the shop.
We used to when we did the knit night at Knit New York, because it sat there it was on 14th and I think First or Second, kind of just off the corner, and it had these big plate glass windows in front, and you kind of walked down into the store, and the store was closed when we did it, but we were in there, and the people that would just like sort of stand at the window and kind of gawk at like all of these guys, in their knitting. It was quite funny. And in fact, one night, someone stopped in, was from a Japanese news station, and said, "Oh, can we come back next week with a camera and like film you guys?" And so
wow.
They came back, and they did some sort of news story on these crazy male New Yorkers who are knitting. So back in that was probably 2004, 2005. So
now my ex picked up knitting before I picked up crochet again, and he well, I like to tell this story. He picked it up because I gave him a beginner's kit because he was doing another hobby that sort of annoyed me. So, but he quickly became an expert. And we would get on Metro North, because we were living in Westchester. We would get on Metro North, and I had the best time watching other people watch him knit.
Right.
It was so funny. And I don't knit. Knitting is a mystery to me. I'm fine with crochet because there's enough still to learn with crochet. There's a ton still to learn with crochet. But I would be sitting like in a meeting somewhere, or on the train, or in a coffee shop, and crocheting away, and someone would say, "I've never seen a man knitting before," and I would say, "Well, you still haven't, because this is crochet." Yeah.
My husband, he always referred to it as your sewing. He's like, "Are you going to be working on your sewing?" I'm like, "It is not sewing." But it's funny because he just, during the pandemic, he was like, "Do you think you could like teach me how to knit?" And so he's now recently started, which to me is great, just because I love seeing him do it, but also now sort of justifies the increasing stash. So I have a justification to continue to buy more.
Very wise.
Yeah. So, but it's been fun. Yeah. It's been fun to kind of watch him get started, and sort of go through the learning process, and he's getting the hang of it. It's cool.
Have you been following Tom Daly and his knitting and crochet?
I followed him for a couple of years, or when he started a couple of years ago, I think, and someone pointed out to me. So I had sort of been following him along on his fiber journey. But it's just great to see, it sort of explode all across. I mean, the number of people who have sent me the pictures has been pretty amazing. But yeah, he's adorable. And
did you see that photoshopped picture where he was sitting, like probably between rounds of dives or something, sitting there in his Speedo, knitting something, and because of Photoshop, he was knitting something quite
Yeah.
inappropriate.
I saw that. I was like, what is, because I said, I've seen this picture before, and it was, he was working on like either the white cardigan that he worked on. I was like, oh, these people, come on, find something better to do. But yeah, I love that he's, you know, using that platform that he has. And so these knitted things he then donates to charity auctions and is able to raise a ton of money for, you know, the various charities that are important.
Yeah.
So kudos to him for, you know.
As soon as I found out he knits and crochets, which is many months before the Olympics, I reached out and tried to get him for my interview series, but you know, he's a little busy, so I'm not surprised I haven't heard back.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's great. And you know, if he, you know, if he can get a few more guys involved knitting, I think it's helpful for everyone, just because, you know, the more I think the more guys that do it, the better patterns that are going to come out of it, in terms of, like, you know, I still sort of get frustrated that there's not a lot of, I mean, there's a lot more than there used to be, but you know, sort of things designed specifically for men that are, you know, things that aren't these sort of like super traditional kind of, you know, argyle sweater.
Actually, recently I did a Topic Tuesday, which it is a live stream that I do every Tuesday, and it starts out with a topic. It doesn't always stick to topic.
It spirals from there, yeah.
Yeah, sort of like this conversation. But the topic was designers for menswear, and there are some really great ones out there. I only know the crochet ones, but people were calling out knitwear designers for men as well. And
I mean, it is, you know, way more than there were than when I first started. When I first started knitting, so there's just a ton more men designing, and I think that's helpful. And there's just been some great men's more wearable stuff for men. Both I haven't finished on the crochet side, so that's good to hear as well, because I haven't tried to crochet a garment yet. I mean, I've done a hat and I've done a shawl, but I've never like, I'm not there on like trying to do a sweater or something like that.
I actually have a sweater that I need to piece together and finish writing up and present as a pattern. That I've got another one that I was working on for a long time, and I called it the sweater that would not die. And I put it aside, and I'll pick it up again. But this other one is a cardigan, and I like it better than the sweater that would not die. So it's it'll be out. I hope I can get it out this month. I'm trying to do a certain number of patterns every month.
Wow,
it's
impressive. As I go through, you know, and I'm starting to work on more complicated things. I knit my first sweater just this past year.
I saw the picture of your husband wearing that sweater. Yes, it was very nice.
I'm very happy. He's thrilled. You know, one of the downsides of living in California, you don't really need sweaters very often, and so the motivation to spend the time to knit a sweater that I'm never going to wear are fairly low. But yeah, and I think it's called the Little Wave sweater. It was a Brooklyn tweed pattern. Gundren Johnston, I think, was the designer.
Brooklyn tweed has great yarns, don't they?
Yeah, and I used, you know, it was one of those where the pattern called for their yarn. I've always been, it was one of those sort of dream yarns that you know, you look at their lookbooks and everything just looks so luscious and dreamy. And so I sort of like wanted to buy the yarns, but it wasn't one of those things that I was like, I'm just going to buy a bunch of it and see what I can, you know, do. Cause you know, it's not cheap yarn. And so I said, he asked me, could you knit me a sweater? And he kind of picked it out. And so I said, well, this is it. I'm going to use the recommended yarn. And it's great. It was a great pattern. A little more complicated, a little more challenging than maybe I should have chosen for my my first go on a sweater. So, you know, it has sort of I wouldn't call it a cable. It's like a two row cable, but it has a a winding cable, a cable pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And I, chose to do it in a charcoal gray, so the pattern's really hard to see. And I laughed when I finally finished it for him. I said, I've probably knit this sweater 3 times now because oh, what's that?
This is a crochet hook with it's like an acrylic tip that lights up. I mean, I like this series of hooks simply because the handle feels great in my hand, but they're great when I work with dark yarns too. I don't know that there's a knitting needle equivalent to that, but
I've just gotten a very bright light, and it just became one of those things that was a project where I couldn't sit and watch TV. It was but I did it was the first time I ever finally buckled down and learned how to read a chart for knitting and understood why people use them, because how to sort of read it and kind of read your knitting. So it was a great learning process. I think the end product turned out great. He really likes it. I don't know when he's ever going to wear it because it's a big, it's a heavy worsted weight, chunky kind of cardigan, but
you can take it on trips up north.
If we ever get to travel again, maybe we'll go somewhere cold. So
yeah. No, well, you said your family's in Texas, and his family is there apparently, right?
Subsequent to us moving out here, my folks moved out here as well. So now we're all
all
out here and aging in place together. So
yeah, well, I mean that's why I came back to North Carolina, is because this is where my family is. And, when a lot of things required big changes in New York, I came here.
Yeah.
And speaking about appropriateness of garments for the climate, I used to make these scrap scarves that were like really, really colorful, and I would in the winter in New York.
Oh yeah,
perfectly appropriate, and I would get so many compliments on them in the grocery store.
Yeah.
I haven't worn a scarf since I've been in North Carolina, coastal North Carolina. I mean, if I were in the mountains of North Carolina, I would still need them. But
it's kind of why I have started to gravitate more to wanting to do shawls, because at least where we are, because we're close enough to the water, that in the winter it's not heavy sweater weather, but it gets cool enough that you could throw a shawl on, and I still, in the morning when I'm out walking the dogs or whatever, we'll throw on like a light knit, not a heavy bulky knit cap, but like a fingering weight knit cap is great.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I think I've kind of shifted my focus a little more to trying to do some shawl knitting, just because we don't have all my scarves and all my scarves and heavy hats and heavy coats are in those Ziploc vacuum bags in the garage for if we ever get to get back to New York and be in the winter. But
so is that what happens to most of the things that you create? They just go into storage, or you gift them, or
I'm a big gift knitter. Almost everything I've knit gets given away. So I'm working right now on where we are planning a trip and to visit two families, and so I'm knitting everyone hats. So this is one of the patterns.
So I think I've seen pictures of that on your Instagram.
One family, and then the other family is getting this one.
I like that too.
Yeah, so I do end up tending to give away much of what I knit, because it's going to folks that live in colder climes, and I also we have a fair number of friends. We have sort of one set of friends that all their kids are sort of moving up through high school and graduating, so that's going to be a great blanket gift pipeline. And then we have a kind of a wave of our gay friends who have just had babies in the last 4 or 5 years, and so there's sort of this little baby boom that's happened, which has been great because we get to knit like knitted toys and little stuff like that. So that's been cool.
Exactly. I love
hoping to do more knitting for myself this next year.
So what would you like to make more for yourself?
I mean, I think that so once I finish, I have 10 of these hats to get done, and a couple of little stuffed animals. I think the next, I just told my husband this morning. I said, I think the next project I start, I want it to be for me, And I did my first Stephen West shawl last year, and I kept that for myself. It was a kit I bought from my local yarn store, which is the Knitting Tree LA, which is an amazing yarn store here in LA. And she had put together kits for one of those things, so I did that. But I think another shawl, for myself before, as we sort of head towards winter, and maybe not one of the super involved Stephen West ones, but maybe one of the more sort of simple ones. I just learned. I took a brioche class, and so I just started learning brioche knitting. So maybe moving beyond a hat and doing a shawl that has some brioche in it would be
cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I always think let them eat brioche. But,
it's great because I'd seen pictures of it, and it looks so, because it kind of looks like that fisherman's rib. So I expected it to be this really dense, heavy fabric, but it really makes this like kind of light, puffy, kind of like brioche, kind of the light, puffy fabric.
Oh, nice.
It's much less dense than what I had imagined, and it's super tricky. Mistakes are very, very hard, at least for me, to fix. So I do a fair amount of unknitting and reknitting, but it's fun to learn a new technique. So
yeah, exactly. So a lot of people I know, they actually do a substantial business selling their finished objects. I've never had any success with that. Have you ever tried it?
I haven't. No, I mean, I just don't. I'd just rather give them away. Now, what I have done, and I may try this as another sort of fundraising idea, is I have for charity auctions and things here done sort of like a silent auction of like a commission piece. So I'll donate, say I will help you, design a hat, and I will knit you a hat, to raise money for this charity. So what I have a kit from it's actually from Knit Picks, that for it's an Afghan. It's called the color shift thing. It's sort of a prismatic kind of fade Afghan kit. And I was thinking about maybe, I don't know if it'll happen for this year, or maybe I'll save it for next year, but to go ahead and make that, and then to run some sort of silent auction-y kind of thing to raise money for the Age Right as well. So, but actually selling it, I don't know. It's one of those things, like I feel like it would take a little bit of the joy out of it. So much. I think part of the joy is just doing it and sort of giving it to someone, and sort of adding a stress factor of having to get it done to try to sell it would probably take a lot of the joy out of it.
And for me, it's the worst thing is just being insulted by people who don't think that it's worth what it's worth.
Right. Yeah. No, it's true.
Even if it's cheap yarn, when I was a technology consultant, I was making $65 an hour at best. If I were to charge that kind of rate for some of the stuff that I make, no one would ever pay for it. They want stuff at less than minimum wage.
Right.
For
true.
And that I get sort of ornery about this subject because people just devalue the amount of time, the amount of skill and talent that it takes.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think it almost, it's just not worth having that sort of that battle every time you want to do something. And I'd rather, make something I loved making for someone that I love, and just have that be
exactly.
So,
and especially if it's like yarn from someone you know. I have a piece of, well, it's no longer in this room, but I got some hand-dyed yarn from a friend of mine, and I made, all of anything that I make with that yarn is not leaving my hands. So the first thing that I made is, it's going to serve as a scarf. It's sort of a little bit sort of like a boomerang shawl. It's if people want to, it's on my Ravelry and on Instagram as the Alicia shawl.
okay.
But and in fact, there are pictures of the piece itself. It's in the pink, the red and pink yarn. But I look at that and I see my friend Daniel, who did the hand dyeing,
Mhm.
and so like that, it's like a child that Daniel and I had.
Right.
So it's not leaving my hands.
Right.
I mean, us people say I have a crush on Daniel. I don't know why, but
Yeah, I
moving
know.
right along.
I can. I know. I can definitely. I could see how. Part of with the yarn. Part of the fun for me is, I'll see these yarns and is coming up with a project. So I have all of these little Ziploc bags with kits already made of yarn that I picked out. I picked out the pattern. I mean, it probably would be another 7 years worth of knitting that I have already pre-made into these little kits. And there's, I don't know, I just find that so much fun. I mean, the knitting it up will be a whole nother, a whole nother thing to enjoy, but just sort of finding the yarns that go together and finding the pattern that kind of works with those yarns is sort of a fun thing to do just on its own for me.
So, generally speaking, are you yarn first or pattern first?
I would say I'm probably yarn first. I mean, sometimes it can, usually that's the way it has worked so far. I think that now, as I've accumulated a fair amount of yarn, I'm a little bit. The problem is oftentimes, I have never bought, usually don't buy much more than a single skein of something. And so if I do end up finding a pattern, then it usually becomes, then I have to go out and buy try to buy the yarn or dig through the stash and try to put some things together. But occasionally it will happen that way. But more often than not, I'll find a yarn that I love, or I'll see, two, and I'm like, oh, okay, I'm going to try to put these 2 or 3 things together. Then I'll go to Ravelry and say, find me a shawl pattern that requires, 3 different colors and X yardage of fingering out yarn, and then I'll see what pops up, and then kind of go through, okay, that one would work with these yarns, or something like that. So,
Yeah,
I do love the process. I do love that process of sort of, and maybe that's the gateway drug to designing. I don't know, where you're sort of like, at some point you're like, okay, I have this great yarn and I'm not seeing anything particularly grabs me. Let me see what I can do. And I do think, maybe somewhere down the road, once I have a little more mileage under my belt in terms of actually knitting shawl patterns and kind of getting an understanding of how they're structured and the elements kind of go together, I could see that happening.
Yeah, I've actually, I got started designing with a hat pattern, and I wound up making a lot of changes, and in the end, it was more my changes than the original pattern. So I just wrote up a new pattern that was all in the, the whatever change that I had made, and so that was my first pattern that I did. And a lot of the people, I was fairly new to the YouTube yarn community, or the YouTube crochet community at the time, had just started my channel, and I put it out there, and a lot of people just loved it. So it was great fun. It's a bit of a yarn eater, and it's but I still think it's a good pattern.
Yeah.
And I just finished a Hat Not Hate project, so I'm a bit hatted out.
Yep.
For now. Although I just made this one, I think I made it yesterday.
Oh,
This
wow.
is. Do you know Crystal Bagaday?
No.
She has a very, very, very big crochet channel.
Okay.
Anyway, this is one of her designs, and she, as Bagaday, she's known as Bod. So some people are doing a Bod along,
Okay.
where like you do one of her patterns exactly as written, and then you a random winner will be selected from people who send in pictures of things. I love the texture of that.
Yeah, that is great.
The way it worked out, and I was totally bored doing it. It worked out great. Don't tell
Well,
Kristen.
that's why hats. That's why I do love hats, is because even if you're like sort of like not loving the pattern, you don't have too much more to go. You're like in a hat, you just never have too much more to go.
Exactly.
Especially with the ones the last three of this one are all kids sizes. So I'm like, I just really don't have that much more. And I do actually really enjoy this. This is a great. This is Hunter Hammerson. It's called Exigencies, and it's a great. It looks a lot more complicated than it is with the slip stitches, and it's just a really great mindless.
Oh, cool! Yeah.
But like they're little, and they'll take no time. Now, when you get on one of these shawls that like starts at the point and gets out to expands as it goes, and you get to the 2/3 point, and if you're not enjoying that, then you're like, oh, each row is getting longer
and longer and longer. The design that I'm doing right now, it's the actual method. It's like it's really easy, but it looks like it isn't.
Oh wow, yeah.
Which is my specialty, actually. Really easy, but it looks like it isn't.
I love bang for your buck patterns where it looks like it's very, very complicated, but it's in knitting it's like these slip stitch patterns that have multiple colors. It just looks like you're doing a lot of work, but it's really quite easy.
Yeah, but the thing about this is I have written up the pattern already.
Oh,
I have the pattern complete, but this design sample is taking forever because it's very long. It's going to be a wrap.
Okay.
Like an oversized, very, very oversized scarf.
Right.
Although you could do it as a scarf. I make that clear on the pattern. But it's very long rows of single crochet and chain.
Okay.
So it takes forever.
Yeah.
So, but I love this yarn, actually. This is some cheap yarn, actually. It feels nice, and it's Lion Brand Summer Nights, which is a one-weight yarn. I'm talking about myself too much. Stop me when I do that. Anyway,
it looks like it has like some like halo to it. Is it?
No, there's no real halo to it, but there is some sparkle.
Okay.
I don't like halo, actually.
I don't mind knitting it. I hate unknitting, like anything that has like fuzz to it. But if you make a mistake,
frogging that stuff is a nightmare. I mean, I have a couple of abandoned projects that I started with yarn that I didn't want to move forward, and I couldn't move backward because frogging it was a nightmare. So they're like stalled.
Yeah,
they're so like in a Ziploc bag.
So many of the patterns, and I love the way they look. Call for or suggest that you like hold a strand of mohair with a strand of fingering, and so I bought some, and I've just never been brave enough to do it yet because I'm just dreading the frogging when it inevitably I make the mistake. But it looks so great when it's Max and Vincent have some beautiful like mohair stuff, and they hold it double. It looks great. But someday I'll brave it, but I haven't done that yet.
Have you done any double stranding?
Yes. In fact, one of the blanket I made this year for the graduate was you kind of created your own fade by holding you had three colors and you held three stands together, so it was all the same color. Then you swapped one out, and then you swapped two out, and then you kind of transitioned to the third color. So you kind of created this ombre fade. So I've done some of that. I've never. Oh, and actually on this, not this one, but this purple yarn here at the bottom. This was a set of this yarn called Wyndham from Modern Daily Knitting. The old Mason-Dixon knitting women had put this kit kind of together, but I was trying to make more than one, and I ran out of this purple, so I held together a different purple and a sort of lighter color to try to mimic it in the second and third ones that I did. But haven't done other than that much holding together. So
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that I ever did was a blanket or a throw that was double stranded, sometimes triple, where I have learned from one of the YouTubers that I follow very, very closely, where you can do it with it, even if you have a stash with all different weights and anything, as long as you keep like a consistent strand of something else. Like if you have a strand of like, even if it's one of those awful store brand yarns, but you pair it up with whatever other yarn you have, and just and then the store brand yarn is going to be yards and yards and yards. And then if you only have a few yards, or maybe 20 or 30 yards of this yarn, and then maybe 40 yards of the next yarn, and then maybe 10 yards of the next one, and they might be different weights. But as long as you have that one that is consistent, you can make a really nice scrap gown that way.
Yeah. I like these a lot of these scrappy projects are really
Yeah. I used to love doing that with a waffle stitch scarf, because I can do those in my sleep. But yeah. Oh, there was something else I was going to ask you, and it's escaped me completely. But you know, we've been talking for so long. But
it's been great fun.
it has. So I want to thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Please send me any pictures you want me to include, any links you want me to include. If you have any social media presence outside of Instagram that I don't know about, I would love to.
Not really, but I will. But absolutely, I will, and I appreciate the offer, and I will definitely want to continue this conversation about getting you involved in the make-alongs for the Ace cycle. That would be fantastic.
Well, just hang on after I stop recording, and we'll keep talking.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So I want to thank everybody who has been watching us all this long time. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have, because we really have. And as always, watch, or like, subscribe, comment, share, all the standard YouTube crap, and keep coming back. And bye-bye now.